there's a real kind of like organic quality to the kind of the dialogue, and that film came out after about a solid decade of like post lock stock kind of gangster films. But it was what really struck me about that film was just the way that it just felt like very realistic in that way, just in terms of the way you kind of had the dialogue. There's some great lines that came just after that moment, like leaving the house is a lifestyle choice with the just because he's got a kid, and bringing all those elements together. Was that something you were had always wanted to do, bring that kind of element to a film?
I think it was that I felt that I hadn't seen that experience on screen. I'd lived in Brighton and been around these kinds of people. Obviously, I'd not been involved in murders or any kind of stuff like that, but I certainly had seen the kind of the drug dealing side of it, and I was watching films and people weren't talking like I talked, and I just wanted to see that, and without having to. When we made that film, because we did it totally independently, we didn't have to answer to anybody. I mean, this film is it's a British crime film. It's the most unfashionable genre that there is. There was no way this was ever going to get funded by anybody. Certainly not at that point, as you say, with all the kind of Danny Dyer movies that were going on at the same time. So it was, not Dyer, of course, I'm sure in 20 years' time we'll all be having these massive coffee table books about the football violence movies, and everyone will be going, oh no, I love them at the time, they're fantastic, ironically, But I think that and it had come out of improvisation as well, So there was a definite script, but then there was a thing that I'd picked up from working with Armando Iannucci on Time Trumpet and other shows that he'd been doing, which was like kind of going on and off the script. So there was bits of improvisation, but it was more just to rub the edges off stuff, so it sounded more real, and to get around the more genre-y elements of it, because the stuff that kills these kind of movies is people like geezers threatening each other. And no one can ever do it well because it's just not real, No one ever does it, and so it always sounds really stagey and awful. So you kind of have to kind of bring it back and make it as understated as possible.
Yeah, I think there's like a moment where Michael Smiley does like threaten the Garvey character in a really kind of menacing way, and then just immediately apologizes, and it's just really sort of funny. And I think
he says he's going to fuck him up the arse and set his hair on fire, I believe, which was a Smiley improvisation, because I would never write anything as revolting as that.
But I mean, where did you film that? Was that in Robert Hill's house? Or was
Right. Yeah. So that house, we've been filming stuff in that house for 10 years. And making short films and kind of and Rob Hill had made a film called Project Assassin, which he directed, which had been shot all in that house. So it was a well-trodden house. We knew it well, and Rob's mum and dad were completely supportive of us ruining and wrecking their house for months on end. Which is none of it would have happened without them. I don't think.
But I sort of like the moment in that which. He threatens to break the door down and says, no, it's Victorian.
Yeah.
I just wonder if that was like coming out of like the fact that you actually generally, out of necessity, didn't want to break the door down.
No, that was written in because of Bob's odd pride about the house, which, these kind of conversations would happen all the time. And a lot of the singing that Bob does in this film it's based around him, so, we fitted it to him as much as possible, So, yeah, that stuff was... It's quite close to reality, except for the copious amounts of death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned like the $6,000 figure. Was that the figure to just get the film shot, or was that the total amount you spent to get it released?
No, I mean it's an expensive film school, making your own movie, and we knew quite a lot of how to do things, and we certainly knew how to do post-production, and we knew how to shoot stuff for not very much money, but it was quite a steep learning curve when it came to things like music rights and how you complete a movie so that you can actually properly sell it. So the actual final cost was about $25,000, but that was because we stupidly put a Karen Dalton track in it, which we then had to pay like $10,000 for.
Right.
So we were like, but it was a good track, so it was worth it, I think. But I think that if we'd have to make a no budget movie like that, like 6 months later, you could have done it a lot cheaper. You could have done it around the $6,000 mark and delivered it rather than having to spend a load of extra cash. But then we did. To be fair, a lot of it was the payments were that everyone worked for free and then they were paid later, which is usually what happens is you do that and you never get paid.
Yeah.
But on this film, everyone did get paid.
Yeah, I think Darren Aronofsky did something similar with Pi, and I think it took him a long time to track people down afterwards. And I think I remember him telling me a story once where it took him about 10, 15 years later, and they finally tracked down one guy and gave him a check for 25 grand because that film had made so much money.
Yeah.
So
that never happened with us.
Really?
We gave people checks for 25 quid. But it was nice that we did, and because it was so quick as well. I mean, that was 8 days that it was. That we could afford to actually pay them in the end. The very tiny amount of money that it made just about covered its costs. Though I did get paid for my bit of it and got my investment back only a year ago.
Really?
So, it's not a get-rich-quick scheme,
No.
the Down Terrace.
But it was, I guess, a proper career-building step in as you said, you wanted
I mean,
to
in
make a
retrospect,
film,
it looks like that, yeah. But at the time, we had no clue.
No forward plan. You didn't have a 5-year plan.
No, nothing. And we didn't know we'd even made a film until we'd looked at the edit. We shot it, but we didn't know what we had at all.
Yeah.
Which was a nice surprise when it wasn't totally shit. We watched it back and went, oh, I can actually sit through this without having to go and have a tea in the middle of it. This might actually be a film, and that, which is good.